Okay, well, I'll go ahead and get started here. So hopefully everybody knows they are showing up for the Trauma and Violence Informed Physical Activity Landscape of Practice meeting today. As Before I begin, I would like to acknowledge the land on which Carleton University, where I am currently located, um, is located on the unceded, unsurrendered traditional territories of the Algonquin and Anishinaabe Nation. So I am very grateful to be a guest on this land where I live, work, and engage in physical activity on. And if you'd like to learn more about the land that you're on, I encourage you to check out Native Land Digital. There's a little link on the slide. It's a really great Indigenous-led Canadian not-for-profit organization. So just a brief overview for today. I will just provide an overview of the project that we're working on, and then we'll really dive into Dr. Grace McKeon's talk, which we're excited about, and we'll have time for questions and then discussions in a breakout room. So I'd like to, again, acknowledge that we're really grateful that this work is funded by the Public Health Agency of Canada through their call Preventing and Addressing Family Violence. So this funding supports the scaling up of trauma and violence-informed physical activity programs. So we are midway through this grant, and we've made a great deal of progress, including the implementation of community-based programs with over 130 self-identified women who've taken part in our research, and we've provided childcare and concurrent programming for their children across 4 sites in Ottawa, Vancouver, and Toronto. So as part of this funding, we also created this landscape of practice, which is an opportunity to learn about similar research across the globe with a diversity of researchers, community programmers, and community partners. So just briefly before I pass the baton off to Dr. McKeon, we will have Dr. McKeon's talk, which will be about 20 to 25 minutes. And then we'll have a Q&A period with everybody. And then we offer breakout rooms. And this is an opportunity for community advisory board members, which is a closed group, service providers and researchers to meet kind of separately to talk about issues that may be important to them. So we will offer you the opportunity to self-select for that. Okay, so now I'm getting to the most exciting part of our call today. So I'm really pleased to introduce Dr. Grace McKeon. Grace is an exercise physiologist and postdoctoral research fellow at the University of New South Wales in Sydney, Australia. Her work focuses on the role of physical activity to improve the health of populations exposed to trauma, including emergency service workers, refugees, and asylum seekers, and Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people. So without any further ado, I am going to pass the floor over to Grace. So we'll give you a minute to set up there, Grace.
Okay, beautiful. Well, thanks so much for having me, Francine and Gabby. And importantly, I also want to acknowledge the lands that I'm meeting on today. So I'm in the east coast of Sydney, and I'm on the lands of the Bidjigal people of the Eora Nation, and importantly acknowledge elders past and present. So yeah, thanks so much for having me. I've been wanting to join one of these sessions. I really love the work that you and your team do. But unfortunately, it's usually at about 2 a.m. in Sydney time. So thanks so much for accommodating all of you today. I know for some of you it's 6 p.m. And a heat wave, which isn't ideal, but thanks for sticking by. Hopefully you'll get something out of it. So as Francine mentioned, I'm an exercise physiologist by background. I'm also a research fellow at the University of New South Wales. And what I'm really interested in is looking at how we can improve access to physical activity for groups who are exposed to trauma or have been exposed to trauma. And so acknowledging really importantly that physical activity and particularly leisure time physical activity is seen as a privilege. I'm really interested in targeting those groups and acknowledging some of those barriers that exclude people from health initiatives. So things like poverty, mental illness, difficulty accessing healthcare because of language barriers and those sort of things. Why? Because we know that physical activity can be a really powerful tool for improving both physical and mental health. And so I guess the bulk of my work is looking at different models of care, but importantly, looking at how we can upskill the different relevant workforces to make sure that happens in a safe and inclusive way. And so across all of that, all the work I've been doing over the past sort of 6 years has had a key focus on co-design and participatory research methods. And so I'll today present some of the work which is co-designed research that I conducted with people from refugee and asylum seeking backgrounds in Sydney to design a physical activity service. Okay, so I thought I'd just give you a little bit of context to where I'm from. So here's some photos of Sydney on the left. So this is the Sydney Opera House, beautiful harbour we have. And then below to the left, we also have Bronte Beach, which is about 10 minutes from the university where I work. And I guess this is what Australia is more known for, our beautiful beaches and coastline. And it's actually where about 80% of our population live, is around the coast. But then the reality is the majority of our country is actually very diverse, very dry desert landscapes. And everyone knows our famous kangaroos, which we don't ride to university. Now, I thought I'll just give you a little bit of context to the work I've been doing and how I got into this space. So when as Francine mentioned, I'm an exercise physiologist. I believe you also call it an EP or exercise physiologist in Canada. But back when I started about 6 years ago, when I finished my undergrad degree, it was still quite uncommon to have exercise physiologists embedded within mental health teams in the hospitals. That's changed a lot now, but I spent a lot of time in my last year on placement in inpatient wards, and then a little bit when I finished, but that's where I really became interested in research, having worked with a lot of the academics in those teams. I then moved in and started my PhD in about 2017. And the focus of my work at that time was working with people from emergency service workers, so police, fire, paramedics, who we know are regularly exposed to trauma, and whom the traditional mental health treatment might be particularly stigmatizing. And so we thought this was a really important group to target. And so I spent a lot of time working with this community organisation called Behind the Scene. And so you can see pictured in the middle here, on the left is my supervisor, Associate Professor Simon Rosenbaum, and then we have Ross and Ronnie in the middle. And so Ross is a firefighter. He was medically discharged with post-traumatic stress disorder after about 25 years in the force. And then his wife, Ronnie, is a social worker. And so together they created this amazing organisation which aims to raise awareness around mental health for this population, but with a particular focus on the impact it also has on family members. And so I spent 4 years running digital physical activity and diet interventions for this population, delivered via private Facebook groups. And so one of the key things, as I mentioned, I'm interested in looking at the role of different workforces. And so a key part of this project was that I co-delivered the whole program with an emergency service worker with experience of mental illness. And so we had an exercise physiologist and myself co-delivering all of the content. So often I would develop the content, so it'd be things based on behaviour change techniques, goal setting, etc., things we know that work to help change behaviour. But then I would be delivering it alongside. They would often rewrite all the content, make it far more relatable, funnier, and then they would be the ones posting the content. So it just made the content far more relatable, and I think was one of the key reasons for the success of this project. So as opposed to having an exercise physiologist telling a group of first responders they need to be active, coming from someone who's been through it was far more effective. And so what we showed with this big trial that we ran was that we can reduce levels of distress among this population through intervening with exercise and diet intervention. Now, the next key project I've been working on, this has been since the PhD, is a project called the Ironbark Project. It's a really large multi-site trial targeting falls prevention and physical activity in our Indigenous population, so our Indigenous elders. And I think similar to Canada, but our Indigenous population here in Australia experience unacceptable disadvantages. So huge discrepancies in health outcomes, but also social outcomes, education, employment. And so they're a really important priority population. And so we spent the last couple of years delivering this co-designed physical activity intervention. And so my key role in this project was to train all the staff across these 19 communities in Australia. And then most recently, and what I'll spend my time speaking about today, is a project I'm really passionate about called Addy Moves. So to give you some context of what Addy Moves is, we called it Addy Moves because it is located within a broader community centre called Addison Road Community Centre. And so it's in the inner west of Sydney, and it's an amazing organisation that is home to 40 other social services which are co-located. So everything from, there's a legal centre, there's a food pantry, which is the main thing that this organisation do, where they feed over 8,000 people every week. So people can come to this food pantry and receive really subsidised or free groceries, and there's queues out the front there. In that photo, you can see this is where people stand in queue every single day. And then we're really fortunate. So just across the road, about 20 metres, there was a hut. You can see it was quite horrible when we first were given this hut, stained carpets, strange furniture. But we were really lucky that the community organisation let us essentially rent it for free, with the idea being that the same populations that are accessing the food pantry are also highly likely to not have access to physical activity, but would really benefit. So just to give you a little bit of context as the population we're working with. So our funding initially came from New South Wales Health, so our state government, and also a little bit of funding from Garden's Neuroscience Network. And so the purpose of that funding was to co-design this project with people from refugee and asylum seeking backgrounds. So to give you a bit of context of the treatment of refugees in Australia, we have some of the most punitive policies in the world, which really aim to deter people from seeking safety. And so here's just some of the stats. You can see in the middle, when people do come and seek asylum in Australia, we'll hold them in detention for horrendous periods of time. You can see here the average of 689 days. And so in Australia, we have the countries that most people are coming from in 2021 and 2022 were Iraq, Myanmar, Afghanistan, and Syria. And so we wanted to target this population who often don't have access to not only physical activity, but health services in Australia, and see how we can create a sort of safe and inclusive environment for people to be physically active. So where did we start? So we began on a experience-based co-design framework. We adopted that when we first opened the doors. And so that involves these 7 stages, including setting it up, engaging experiences from our priority population, but importantly, also getting the perspectives of people who provide services to them. And so we wanted to 6 stages, which firstly involved conducting one-on-one interviews with the population. So we spoke with 18 people, including people from refugee backgrounds, but people providing services. So we had people providing legal support, people who provide counselling, etc. And we really want to understand what people's previous experiences were like with physical activity, their barriers and facilitators. And so after conducting those one-on-one interviews, the next stage was we took those away, analysed them thematically, and then actually produced a 20-minute film, which was key little snippets of individuals' interviews. And we did those little snippets based on the themes which we developed. And then we use that as a chance in the next following workshop to present those themes back to the participants and to see were we truly capturing what they were trying to tell us. And so in that next stage, we still kept our consumers and the providers separate, as we didn't want to impact the power dynamics there. So we gathered those experiences again separately. And then in the final stage, what we did was we brought the consumers and the providers back together. And what they ended up developing were priorities for our physical activity service. And so there was a whole range of reasons where it didn't quite look the way it did in this initial framework. It looked more something like this, for a range of reasons, working with people speaking many different languages, even dynamics between members. There are a whole range of reasons. We had many women who had just fled Afghanistan because this was at the beginning of 2022. And then people, of course, ended up in employment and all different reasons why logistically running these workshops was extremely difficult. But I think it's really important, and the key thing I want to talk about here is just the difficulties of imposing Western timeframes around grants on these types of processes. And I heard a quote once on the importance with co-design and moving at the speed of trust. And I think that is so important. This period actually took a whole year where we hadn't seen any clients, but I think this is the real success of this project and the reason it's been adopted so smoothly into the community. So I just wanted to play this video. Just jump in and let me know if this doesn't work. This is just some of the key snippets from the individual interviews.
Everything was very nice. Then Taliban came, they destroyed everything, they damaged. They didn't let the people work, mostly women, mostly girls. And that's why we escaped from there. We came here, but I miss my country.
Mental and physical activity. Refugee and asylum seekers experiencing more pressure, anxiety, depression, and PTSD, and sometimes backlash to negative factors from the home country in the host country. And this is the backlash, negative affected to lifestyle is better.
If you, with stress and depression, if you do the physical activity, it's not going to you, the place that it has to be. It's not being helpful for you. You have to be in the place that it feels better for you. Then you can do the exercises. So it means there is no physical activity now in Afghanistan.
So I think we need to partner up. We need to offer a service that is a bit holistic in that way, that we say, we understand that you have these basic needs, and this is a place where I can help you access those basic needs.
Definitely when I did exercise, I feel more energy. All my tiredness from my body go out and I receive more energy and I become so hopeful in my life and full of energy and like a strong feeling, and it's really good for mental health. When I do like gym, I feel I'm a new person. Still, I'm like so young, I'm energetic. I can do that. Like I can make a decide about my life when I'm doing my exercise, for example, at the gym. And it gives me very good feeling and especially hopeful for the future.
It's also, I have to say, for the patients who are receptive to it, if you, again, give them a little bit, they come back in 3 months and they're like, look at all the changes that I've made. And you're like, yay, so nice, right? Because you've broken through, like it just needs that little chink.
Yeah.
And once you get there and once you show them what they can do, they will take it.
When I'm playing in the football, they will never judge me from where I am or what's my language. Like we all carry about one ball and we run for one ball and for one goal.
It was very.
Okay, so that's a really nice little 2-minute summary of some of the interviews. We've also produced, this is part of our dissemination strategy, but also produced a summary of what the findings were. So we've also got this beautiful infographic, which I'll just talk through today, but I'll also send you a link to the YouTube video. It's about 6 minutes, so we won't go through that today. But these are the key priorities, or what we're calling our co-designed principles, which our whole program is based on. And so I guess this is the part that really separates what we're doing compared to a traditional commercial gym. And so the first key theme was around cultural safety. And so what this meant was people wanted women's only times and spaces, curtains on the windows, but also that our staff were culturally capable and could respond to things like language barriers. Then the second key theme was around emotional safety. And so again, they wanted staff who were upskilled in mental health and trauma-informed training, but also would know how to respond if there were a crisis and they needed to refer on. And also a thing that was really, really enforced here was the importance of understanding that we as a physical activity service don't necessarily need to be able to address all these things, but making sure we have really strong referral pathways across to all the other services. And it really helps with the unique setting that the Addison Road is in, where we have those 40 social services that are actually on site, where we could literally walk someone across the road to any of these additional services. The other thing that was really important here within emotional safety was prioritising joy in movement and acknowledging that people face complex and many barriers to physical activity, and they wanted to make sure our staff were aware of that, not judgmental, all of those sort of things. Within emotional safety, people also were reporting how important it is that it didn't look like a commercial gym. So we've really tried to make it inviting with colours, culturally responsive music, so letting people choose their own music when they come in the door. And a new thing that we've been recommended by a refugee service was actually having a big world map up on the wall. So it's almost like a point of conversation when someone first walks in, they can show you where they've come from. The next one, which was really important, was around accessibility. And so people wanted us to not only be able to identify, but address a lot of the barriers to accessing physical activity programs. And so that was things like the cost. So we've made sure this program is free for anyone experiencing economic or social disadvantage. They can come and access our exercise physiologists for free. But also the location, how are people going to get there without transport. And then lastly, particularly for women, was childcaring responsibilities. And so looking at these priorities, we have not addressed all of them. Of course, we're conscious of our funding requirements, but that's definitely something we want to work towards, is having childcare as an option. Some people do bring their children along and they sort of play or join into the exercise program. But we really wanted in this co-design process for people to describe all the things they wanted and forget about what our funding model was at the beginning. The next key priority was around support to access basic needs. And so again, acknowledging we are an exercise physiology service. We don't need to address all these basic needs, but we really need to support people if they say they are struggling with employment, struggling with their visa. We need to know where we can send people. And so we spent a lot of time in that first year really developing those pathways. The next one was physical activity literacy. And within this principle is really, really important that people actually really valued having an exercise professional like a physiotherapist or an exercise physiologist delivering the program, because they thought they would be able to tailor the program to their needs. But it was also really important for us to understand here that this term physical activity is not universal, and particularly leisure time physical activity. A lot of the women spoke about this, that physical activity can be seen as sort of a selfish act. And so there's a lot of work there to be done around upskilling the whole community, not just women, but also their family members, husbands, to educate on what the value of this type of physical activity is on mental health outcomes. And then lastly, our last key priority was social and community connection. So with our program, we've really tried to prioritise joy in movement, but also making it fun, group-based where we can, encouraging social connections with other groups. And also to consider here different soft entry points into physical activity. So it's often quite overwhelming to come and join a gym for the first time, but thinking about how we can have other pathways in. So there's groups that already exist within the community centre that do things like gardening and art. So then coming over to their services, meeting them where they're at, and then slowly introducing people, walking them over with a support worker or whoever's running their group, and slowly introducing them to our program. Now, this slide, this is just a quick snippet of that additional video we've created, and I'll post a link in the chat to the YouTube link, which just summarises those key priorities and has some footage of our program in action. Now, this slide is just to quickly show you some key snippets of where we have targeted some of those key priorities. So you can see up on the top left, we've got a women's only group running with curtains on the windows. Down the bottom here, you can see some of the colours and mural. You can see this mural we've got on the back wall. And I'll just tell you a quick little story about this mural. So when we launched back in 2022, we had 4 people from refugee backgrounds who painted this beautiful mural for us. And so it was led by a Kurdish refugee named Moz Azimataba, and he was held in detention for 8 years in Australia. And during that time, he always wanted to paint, but in detention, they wouldn't even give him access to paint or a paintbrush. And so what he did was he used a paintbrush and coffee, and that's what he did over the course of those years. And so when he came, he's now an amazing artist in Australia. He's just been got into what we call the Archibald Prize for the 2nd year in a row. It's an extremely prestigious art award in Australia. But him and 3 other women who had just fled Afghanistan, so Marwa, Farhad and Farhad, they painted this mural for us and donated it to our gym, and they did the whole thing with paintbrushes, which is not paintbrushes, sorry, toothbrushes, which is amazing, but also really lightens up this room and has a beautiful story. Then in the middle there, you can see some clothing. So again, addressing that barrier around access. So we've partnered with a charity called Thread Together, who provide us with free exercise clothing and shoes for anyone who doesn't have access. So there's no barrier there. If people don't feel like they have the right clothing to come in, they can come and help themselves to the wardrobe and take it home with them. And then the last key snippet here I've got is one of our flyers. So we've translated all our materials into 12 languages now, and that's still growing. Where to now? This is the last slide, I promise. So our team now is doing a lot of work around how do we upskill the relevant workforces. And so a lot of this work is being led by one of our PhD students, Chiara Mastrogiovanni. And she's doing some amazing work looking at how do we bring these 2 workforces together and bring them closer together. So what we've been doing is on the one side, we have our exercise and sort of allied health workforce. So looking at things like, are they trauma informed? Have they received cultural capability training? Because we know if we get people referred into these programs and they have a bad experience, we're not going to make any changes and they often won't come back. But then on the flip side, we also need to get our mental health and psychosocial support workforce prepared. We need them to understand the benefits of physical activity, but also to have experienced it themselves so that they're confident to refer into these types of programs. And so we actually did a lot of work, and we still are actually at Addy Moves, where we've spent about 2 years now really targeting the staff of those social programs on site. And so they've had access to our physical activity program over that time, but now they're our champions of this program, and now they're our key referrers into it. So they've experienced the benefits themselves and now are confident in referring into our program. And I'll just show you 2 quick examples of some work we're doing targeting these workforces. So this is a paper we had come out only a few weeks ago where we looked at whether our allied health workforce, so exercise physiologists, we had dietitians, physiotherapists, are they prepared if someone were to disclose gender-based violence during their sessions? And so what we found was that about 75% had only received less than 1 hour of training in this field, and they would not feel confident in referring if anyone were to disclose. So there's a lot of work there to be done, because acknowledging that those principles were designed with people from refugee and asylum seeking backgrounds, but our program is really broadened now, and we're working with people, almost any population experiencing economic or social disadvantage. So we have people who are experiencing homelessness. We have a woman who lives in a van with her cat, who then comes and exercises once a week. So never would have had access or to an exercise physiologist, who now comes to our program, which is amazing. And then one other paper I'll just draw your attention to. This paper is being led by Chiara. It was just recently accepted in the Journal of Clinical Exercise Physiology, where she provided an expert commentary on key considerations for exercise professionals working with people from refugee and asylum seeking backgrounds. So I'm not sure what it's like in Canada, but in our university degrees, we absolutely were not exposed to anything like that. And so a key part of our program now is providing that sort of workforce development, where we have exercise physiology students and hoping to have dietetic students by next year, where they get exposure to working with these populations while they're still in their undergraduate degrees. Now, I just want to say a really big thank you to our team, particularly to Simon Rosenbaum, but also Chiara and Usma, who are our exercise physiologists who run the day-to-day programs at Addie Moves, and a whole bunch of other people, particularly Carla, Oscar, Scott, and Gulsha, who I want to say a big thank you to as well.